So in this video, I'm going to show you why you need to have cinematic movement for your cinematic videos. Stay tuned. So when it comes to shooting any type of movie-like or cinematic or very epic looking videos, you want to have movement for all your videos. Because if you just have a still video of a still subject or a still whatever you're trying to film, then you might as well just take a photo. The whole point of video is to make sure there's movement. Whether that's time lapses, you want some time of movement going, or a subject that's like talking, you want overlaying B-roll images or videos, you always want constantly to have something moving within the frame. I'm not talking about like it's a matter of speed, but as long as there's something going from left to right, right to left, forward and back, movement is what separates and immerses video from photos. Here are a couple examples of how you have cinematic movement. For example, one, you can do any type of tilt or pan. So you tilt your camera left to right. That is camera movement. Or you can go up and down, left to right. And you really want to experiment with that. Another type of my favorite movement is tracking movements. In other words, you have your subject and you have them walk a certain way, and it's essentially a third-person view of whatever story you're trying to tell. And these are some of my most favorite type of tracking shots, is because one, how epic is it when you're able to see your character and you're able to essentially immerse yourself within their environment. You're essentially right behind them seeing exactly what they see. So for this prime example, I had my friend Poi, and I had him pretend to be a talent or subject that I was going to be filming for. So when it comes to having cinematic movement in any video, well, what you'll need is a Steadicam or any kind of, whether that's a gimbal, to have your camera movements much more smoother. And for this specific video, how you get more cinematic movements is that I like to film in 60 frames per second. What that does is I'm able to track whoever in slow motion, and let's be honest here, everything in slow motion looks pretty epic. So I put my camera here to 60 frames per second, and since it's in 60 frames per second, I want my shutter speed to be 1/60 times 2, whatever that is. So that's 1/120, or closest as I can get. And then since we're gonna be outside, I'm gonna change the aperture to around I'd say f16, since it's pretty sunny out now, and I don't have to worry about whether or not I'm gonna be in focus, because once you're at f16, almost everything is gonna be in focus, so I don't have to worry about like manual focusing and auto-focusing on a Nikon. You wanna make sure you use, especially if you use a Steadicam, you wanna make sure your lens has VR option on your camera, and I'm shooting in 60 frames per second. So what I'm gonna do now is, Poi, I'm gonna need you to walk. I'm gonna tell you, but just walk at a normal pace right now. Okay, walk. I'm gonna follow you from behind. A little slower, a little slower, a little slower, and turn left. Okay, let's make a little loop. Go back to the camera. Walk straight and action.
Ryan Little. Japan.
So all I did was, for my Nikon camera, I made sure that, one, to make these cinematic movements even more dramatic and more epic, is that I filmed in 60 frames per second. And since I filmed in 60 frames per second, you want to have your shutter speed at 1/120 and have your ISO as low as possible depending on your environment, and have my aperture at f8 varying from f16. Since I'm using a Nikon camera and I know that autofocus isn't the best, I might as well play the right game and make sure everything's in focus by having a very huge aperture. Next, you want to have your subject be within, I would say, center of frame. You can play the rule of thirds and have them here, maybe here, and change it up and mix it up. And all you essentially do is just track your subject moving or walking towards some kind of destination, and then you slow down in post-production and Adobe Premiere. Once you have a tracking shot, you're able to control your talent or client and tell them to essentially walk slow to a point where it does look natural and have them walk into whatever environment you want to introduce the story to. For example, a character could be introduced, they're going somewhere from point A to B. So you just track that subject. And there are some tools that you want to use. Whether you have a gimbal, use a gimbal. You have a Steadicam, use a Steadicam. So then the smoother the footage is, the more easier and more smooth your videos will be in post-production when you slow it down even more to 24 frames per second timeline. And then on top of having slow motion tracking shots, what you can do on top of that is you can speed ramp. And if you haven't seen my speed ramp tutorial or fast forward effect, link will also be in the description of how now you can have a slow motion, epic looking transition shot or tracking shot. Then on top of that, you can have a speed ramp to make your little transition B-roll shot look even more epic. And when it comes to movement, these are some of my favorite. And now you know exactly how you can turn a boring looking video to a more cinematic looking video with movement. Remember, movement is important. You don't want to suddenly just have a still image unless it's a talking head video. So then you want to always have movement, whether that's moving the camera left to right, forward and back, or having some kind of tracking shot where you're following a subject so you can introduce movement into your cinematic videos. And you can do this in a Premiere, you can do this in Final Cut, you can do it in whatever program that you want. Moral of this video is, if you want your videos to be more cinematic, include slow motion clips on top of some kind of movement. Play around with it, get better, keep getting better at your craft, and constantly always try to improve your videos. My name is Peter. You're watching Broke Visionary Collective, where we all start with nothing, but you can always create something.